Yeah, this song, you may recognize some of the lyrics. It's called God Has Promised, and I used some lyrics from a hymn called, I think it was God Hath Not Promised, or God Hath Promised Sky's Always Blue, something like that. It was a poem written by a lady named Annie J. Flint back in 1919. And she wrote a lot of poems and hymns and stuff. She was in a wheelchair. She got rheumatoid arthritis when she was very young, and spent the rest of her life in pain and in a wheelchair. This is back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. There was nothing they could do. So she spent her life in a wheelchair, writing poems and hymns and stuff, and supporting herself that way. She's a pretty popular writer, writing poetry books and getting poems and stuff published in magazines and stuff. And she supported her and her sister that way, and grew up without parents. Her parents died when she was like a little, toddler, basically. And her and her sister were given over to her aunt and uncle, and they died, not too long after that. I mean, she just had this terribly rough life. And but she wrote all these hymns about God's grace, and and how here in the chorus, he says, "But God has promised strength for the day, rest for the labor, light for the way." I mean, she's says, yeah, it may be tough, but God provides a way out. So she's got a really neat story. So I used some of the words from that hymn, and some words that I made up, and I made up all the music. I wrote all the music, but I have to give Annie Johnson Flint credit, and it's public domain. She's a public domain. That hymn is in the public domain now, but I have to give her credit for some really neat lyrics, some really neat words. Hasn't promised skies always blue, flower-strewn pathways all our lives through. And God hasn't promised sun without rain, joy without sorrow, or peace without pain. But God has promised strength for the day, rest for the labor, and light for the way, grace for the trials, and help from above, unfailing sympathy, undying love. God hasn't promised smooth roads and wide, swift, easy travel, needing no guide. Never a mountain, rocky and steep. Never a river, muddy and deep. But God has promised He'll always be there to help and uphold us with His loving care, to never forsake us or leave us alone, to love us forever and welcome us home. When we find that we're troubled with sickness or strife, or alone and needing a friend, just look to the Savior who gave up His life. His love and His peace never end. And God hasn't promised silver or gold, a life filled with fortune and riches untold. And God hasn't promised love without hate, success without failure, a heart that won't break. But God has promised strength for the day, rest for the labor, and light for the way, grace for the trials, and help from above, help and uphold us with his loving care, to never forsake us or leave us alone, to love us forever and welcome us home.